Hello, I'm Clifton Pye, an emeritus professor of linguistics at the University of Kansas. In this video, I discuss the contributions that documenting child language can make to projects on language documentation and revitalization. While it is no longer possible to document how children acquire some languages, it is critically important to document child language where it can still be found. Children have much to teach us about the ways in which language is passed from one generation to the next. My primary goal in this presentation is to convince you to document the language of 2-year-old speakers and their families. I will first discuss the significance of research in child language before turning to discuss the place of child language documentation in language documentation and revitalization projects. I will end by presenting a quick guide to documenting child language. Today, child language documentation is only available for approximately 200 of the world's 7,000 languages. Languages disappear when parents no longer transmit their first languages to their children. The transmission chain is surprisingly fragile. It can be broken in a short period of time, even in languages with many speakers, due to the stigma attached to speaking minority languages. 2-year-olds are the most endangered of endangered language speakers. In his 2022 dissertation, Faustino Montes reports an incident in which a mother chastised her mother in Totonac because her 1-year-old son embarrassed her by responding to a taxi driver in Totonac. Now, only a handful of Totonac-speaking children enter preschool in Mexico. The languages of 2-year-old children deserve to be documented like any language variety. It is vitally important to preserve some record of language transmission where this is still possible. Central to the language transmission process is the forging of a language identity. It is equally important to document the cultural practices that center around talking with children. We should identify strategies that support language transmission and use them to help revitalize language communities. As an example of the fabric of language transmission, I present this masterclass in Xiui, or Northern Pame, an Otomaguean language spoken in Mexico. The language begins when NPR observes that a bird flew off. His father asks where the bird went. NPR responds by saying "mbe," which his father repeats as "kuma," behind there, and expands into the sentence, "it went behind there." NPR's father then suggests that he look again, but NPR doesn't respond. His father follows up by asking, "What is that?" And this time NPR responds, "tete," a word that his father guesses is cuchite, puppy. NPR then changes the topic by saying the word tutu. His father doesn't respond, so NPR repeats the word as toto, which his father finally interprets as ntugun, flower. The father then offers a statement that takes the conversation in a new direction. I will play the recording to give you an idea about the pace of the conversation. NPR's father does not slow his speech when speaking to his son. 2-year-olds are difficult conversational partners at the best of times. Their attention wanders randomly, they sometimes respond with invented words, and they are apt to run away. NPR's father shows how a family member with years of experience manages to hold his son's attention and involve him in a conversational exchange. Throughout this exchange, NPR's father checks his interpretation of NPR's utterances by repeating words that he is unsure of. Note in particular how the father is able to interpret NPR's repeated syllable sequences. This skill requires a deep familiarity with the child's words. The father adds the parts of the words that NPR omits, as well as putting the words into complete sentences. The essential feature of the father's repetitions is that they help to keep the conversation alive. It also is necessary to refocus children's attention from time to time. The father used commands to refocus NPR's attention on specific features of the context. These refocusing strategies help the conversation by checking that parent and child are talking about the same things. 2-year-olds have limited attention spans, so it helps to introduce new topics from time to time. The father keeps the conversation flowing here by asking questions and statements to introduce new topics. Once you begin to identify the individual threads in parent-child conversation, you come to appreciate how conversational partners weave together extended conversations. Throughout the conversation, the father uses repetition, refocusing strategies, and the introduction of new topics to keep the conversation alive. These conversational gambits are the hallmark of experienced caregivers. It is shocking to realize how adept 2-year-old children are in maintaining conversational exchanges. What NPR lacks in lexical morphology and syntactic skills, he makes up for by taking his turn in the conversation. NPR uses the same conversational strategies as his father. The conversation begins with NPR's introduction of a new topic about the bird. When his father asked, "Where did it go?" NPR responded, "Behind there." NPR repeated his word tutu when his father didn't respond. He changes the vowel in his word from U to O as a way to facilitate his father's understanding. The vowels U and O vary in many Shui words, so NPR's vowel change displays a sophisticated understanding of Shui phonology. What the puppy was doing with the flower remains a mystery, but NPR's repetition gave his father the chance that he needed to move on to another topic. Of course, not all conversations with 2-year-olds unfold so smoothly. In this example, NPR's father begins by observing that something went up above them. NPR responded with two utterances that are difficult to interpret. His father offers a noncommittal ha-ha as a response. The father's ha-ha indicates that he gets lost in the conversation and thus provides a way forward, even when communication fails. Learning how to identify and repair conversational breakdowns like this is an essential element of acquiring language. There is also evidence that NPR employs the same noncommittal ha-ha response as his father. In this conversation, NPR's father calls his attention to a buzzard carrying an ear of corn. NPR's response is hard to interpret, so his father repeats his initial statement about the buzzard. NPR responds with what I interpret as a noncommittal response, huh? Children demonstrate their individual agency from the time they are born. They set their own agendas, no matter what their parents might wish. Language is a primary tool in children's agency, and they consider themselves to be native speakers of a language from the time of their first words. Even though NPR's speech is halting and ill-formed in comparison to that of other participants, he actively participates in the conversation on his own terms. It is not the mastery of inflectional paradigms so much as attitude that distinguishes a native speaker from a second language learner. These examples display the conversational mastery of a 2-year-old Shui speaker. It is easy to forget that families focus on conversing with their children and not on teaching them language. Ordinary conversation is the secret of language transmission. It is crucial to focus on what you want to say rather than how you say it. In documenting child language, we also document the secret of language transmission. Child language documentation can play an essential role in language documentation and revitalization. Child language research can contribute to building the local linguistic infrastructure. Child language samples document traditional modes of language transmission. Child language samples can form the nucleus of a community language archive, and child language samples can inform teachers about children's language abilities and how to teach the language in school. Child language projects, more than other language documentation projects, require the participation of community investigators to record and transcribe the speech of children and their families. Language acquisition projects benefit most by training members of the children's community to carry out the research. Community investigators learn to record family conversations, transcribe the conversation on computers, and produce language materials for their communities. Community investigators become ambassadors for linguistic research in their community. They enhance the prestige of their language simply by using computers to write their language. This act shows other speakers that their language can be written and studied like the majority language. Language investigators who live in the community will have opportunities to discuss their work with other community members and explain why it is important to use their language. Recording and transcribing children's speech provides an ideal training exercise for community investigators. The speech of 2-year-olds contains short utterances with abbreviated word forms. 2-year-olds are prone to repeating what they are trying to say, and their caretakers often help by rephrasing what a 2-year-old says. A community investigator with knowledge of the language and culture can understand more of what children are trying to say than an outside linguist. Speakers without any computer experience can quickly learn to transcribe children's language on a laptop. A little patience in training a community investigator is quickly rewarded in watching them become expert computer users. The community investigator can serve as a resource for teachers who want to develop written materials in the language for use in schools. The investigators can also create multimedia materials for families at home. The community investigators can produce multimedia resources for language revitalization projects as well. Think TikTok. I will end by giving a quick tutorial on documenting child language. The first step is to clearly explain the goals of documenting child language to the families and language community and obtain their informed consent. This step demonstrates the investigator's respect for the family and the community. Before recording any families and children, it is important to check and make sure that the recorders produce clear recordings that can be transferred to a computer for transcription. Today, many cell phones produce good quality audio and video recordings. The first goal is to record a 2-year-old child and their family for a 1-hour session. The initial recording should be followed up with 4 additional hour-long recording sessions on separate days. I recommend downloading the ELAN transcription program from the website of the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. The main advantage of the ELAN program is that it allows the investigator to link the transcriptions directly to the recordings. This makes it easy for the transcriber to select a segment of the recording to play back again during transcription. The link between the recording and transcription also avoids confusion when transcribing a segment with multiple repetitions of the same words or phrases. The investigator should transcribe the utterances of all the participants in the recorded conversations. You can never know if your project may be the only opportunity to document family conversations in the community. Set up 3 transcription tiers for each child. The first tier should be a broad phonetic transcription of the child's utterance. The second tier contains the equivalent expression in the adult language. This should be a complete adult sentence that remains as close as possible to the words in the child's utterance. The third tier should contain a translation of the adult equivalent in the majority language. Just 2 transcription tiers are necessary for adult speakers. Do not worry about transcribing sounds that are difficult to hear. The transcription just provides an index to the actual recording, which preserves all of the linguistic information. This example from the Mihe language shows the difference between a transcription with and without morpheme tiers. I recommend the use of a minimal transcription system that does not use tiers for morpheme boundaries and morpheme coding. Linguists insert morpheme codes for specialized research interests, but morpheme tiers are not necessary for community investigators who speak the language. Training community investigators in language transcription is hard enough in the beginning without adding morpheme tiers. The transcription goes much faster without morpheme tiers and gives community investigators more confidence. The investigators can also produce results for the children's families more easily. Without doubt, the recordings and transcriptions constitute the fundamental contribution of any project documenting children's language. They deserve the utmost care and respect. The investigators, families, and language communities should understand that the primary goal of documenting child language is to preserve a record that the community can draw upon for centuries to come. The easiest way to set up an archive on a remote drive is to use one of the public storage drives, such as Google Drive. Google Drive allots 15 gigabytes of free storage space, which is more than sufficient for storing small language samples. Google Drive lets the owners of the archive restrict access to the materials as they wish. The Open Language Archives community offers information on the best current practice for archiving language resources. The references that I list here provide basic information on documenting child language. You can find more information on documenting child language on my webpage. Thank you.